Hello. So another LXD release, and so another LXD live stream after the release to go through some of the main features. This should be a pretty short one because we don't have all that many features to go through as part of LXD 419. But there's at least one major feature and some other nice improvements to go through. So what's new in this release? Well, the main thing are instance metrics. It's something that we've been thinking of for quite a while and cannot toy with different ways of doing it, but thankfully other projects and other tooling kind of grew over the years that we could really make use of for this. So what that feature gets you is a endpoint that can be used with tools like Prometheus to pull metrics about every single instance within LXD. And those are metrics around CPU usage, memory, disk network, processes, that kind of stuff. And this then all gets scraped by Prometheus and can be then rendered through tools like Grafana. We currently don't have a pre-made dashboard or any kind that we can use with that data, but that should be pretty easy to write considering that the metrics that we implemented effectively follow the naming scheme of those coming from Node Exporter. That feature also needed a few kind of add-on around it to have things work properly. Specifically, we've got the ability to set a custom metrics address that can be used to have LXD listen on a separate address. So say you've got your Prometheus infrastructure on on a separate network, you can totally configure LXD to handle that by listening on an additional address for this. We also have a custom certificate type called metrics, which can be used to give credentials to something like Prometheus that can only be used to pull metrics, that will not allow access to any actual data or any actual instances. The only thing that particular certificate is allowed to do is access the base entry point of the API and the metrics endpoint. So that's really the main feature that was added. As part of the demo, we're going to be going through some of the data that you get from that. But that should be really a useful tool for anyone who's running kind of any scale of LXD and is wondering, what's going on. Like, where are my resources going? What are the containers that are like seeing the fastest memory growth with tools like either Prometheus, its alert feature especially, or the Grafana Alert Manager. You're able to set thresholds for a whole bunch of those metrics and then have alerts sending you emails or messages on Slack or on Telegram or on whatever you want whenever some metric is exceeding, it's going past its defined range effectively. So that should really help a lot of people better understand what's going on their systems. The second feature that was added is a slight rework of the LXC cluster list command. In the past, it would just have a database column that would just show a yes or no, and it would show yes for any cluster member that's either acting as a database voter or as a database standby. You wouldn't know which. You would just see usually up to 5 of your cluster servers showing yes in the database column. So now we've changed that a tiny bit. Now there's a roles column instead that shows either database or database-standby, depending on what the different machines are doing. In the future, we're going to be also adding more dynamic roles within clusters, and that's going to be very convenient to also see those roles and how they're being balanced and used within the cluster. And the last feature for this release is the now proper support of exporting and importing block custom storage volumes. This was kind of mistakenly enabled for a while and didn't actually work properly, so we turned it off, I believe, in the previous release. So in 4.18, we actually made LXD say, no, this is not supported. And now in 4.19, we're actually adding support for it. So now it's possible to do LXD storage volume export and LXD storage volume import on block storage volumes. There's a bit of a caveat there, which is that those are block volumes and so tend to be quite large, even if they don't hold much data. So it's something to keep in mind, like if you're doing frequent exports for backup, that might end up using a lot of space. And that's for the new features in 4.19. As I said, there's not a ton of new features compared to some previous releases. There was a lot of bug fixes in this particular release. Like if we open the commit list down there's quite a lot. A lot of the bug fixes were around clustering, with some more around both network and storage. So it should make for a really, really stable XT release with some nice new features. And so now switching to a terminal to go through those 3 features. So starting with the metrics. There's not a ton to show here really, but first, as a normal LXD user, you'll be able to always do LXD query 1.0 metrics. And this can take a couple of seconds to show up, just because in my case, I'm running a virtual machine that does not provide these metrics. That's what happens if you run a unsupported operating system in a virtual machine currently. So there's a timeout and then the metrics show up. Here we can see the CPU usage. So what it shows is actually per CPU. So see the CPU ID keeps changing here. Then whether it's user mode or system, so the kind of CPU usage we're dealing with. And then there's the name of the instance, the name of the project, and whether it's a container or virtual machine. So that's one of the metrics for the CPU. Then we've got the total amount. Then we've got the total amount of bytes that's been read by the different instances. Then some more details on completed write, written, write completed. Those are effectively lined up with what you've got in Node Exporter. Some details on file system usage, memory details on just about every single instance and every type of memory. Then network, received, sent, dropped, errors, all of those kind of metrics are in there. And we also have the total number of processes running. So that should make for a pretty decent set. We expect this is gonna be evolving over the years. We might be adding more things. We're gonna have to do some changes in the way we handle virtual machines. Right now, we rely on the agent inside the virtual machine to get us those details. We assume it's not lying to us. This is not necessarily great in a hosted environment. So we've got plans over the next few months to add a host side view only option where you can effectively say, I don't actually trust those guests to tell me what's actually going on. And instead, we'll just rely on whatever the host system itself can say, which tends to be a bit more narrow as far as what it can tell. Like it won't have as much details on like memory usage and that kind of stuff, but it's going to be numbers that can be more relied on, especially if you're dealing with a slightly untrusted environment. Now, the other thing I mentioned as part of that is it's possible to configure it to listen on a different address. So I could do something like this, which would then spawn a separate listener just on that localhost address. So we can see it here as listening on it. And the other feature that's part of it is if I look at my trust store right now, there's nothing in it, but I could add a new certificate. Let's call it Prometheus. Let's set the type to metrics only, and then pass a certificate. So I'm gonna use my main client certificate here. And if we look at the entry, we see that it's restricted to metrics. Its name is Prometheus, and then we've got the details on the certificate itself on the rest of the line. So that's how you would trust a metrics gathering system to talk to LXD with that particular the way it's added there means that it doesn't get access to anything else. I just need to check actually whether I've got it already added in my remotes. Not sure. It looks like I do. Okay. So let's see what happens if I do test. So this should work. That should work fine. Another thing that's worth mentioning is that the metrics are actually cached for a few seconds, so that if the system is scraped by multiple servers, there's no additional load. And once the cache expires, then the next query actually fetches the data again. But as we can see here, if I'm connecting with certificates that's only trusted for metrics and try to access anything other than metrics, you get not authorized. And that's the end of it. So that's what we have with metrics. I'm hoping that over the next few days or weeks, we'll see some Grafana dashboards show up on the web store or whatever they call it for Grafana, so that it's easy for someone to just import that in the Grafana, use Prometheus with LXD, and then get an easy way to filter up like usage based on server or project or any of that kind of stuff. Another thing that's just worth mentioning there is when you're using this as part of a LXD cluster, the data will only show what's running on the local server. So it's expected that Prometheus or whatever system you use will scrape each of the server independently. That actually reduces some amount of load for us. We don't need to forward things around, and it also makes it easier for those external monitoring systems to know exactly where things are. Alrighty. Next feature is that change to the cluster list. So I can just show that by hitting one of my cluster. And that's actually the same output I've got in the release announcement, but come on. There we go. So it shows 3 servers. They each have the database role. None of them have database standby because the first 3 servers in the cluster get the full database role, and only after that, the next 2 will get database standby. Since only have 3 servers, we don't see that role. As I said, we've got some plans to use cluster roles in the future for other things, so that you can totally expect this list to increase and to eventually get multi-line output in this table in the near future. And the last feature is the storage volume block backup. So I'm going to be creating just an example one. So I need to say type block, and we're going to make it quite tiny on purpose. There we go. And now for what was added, it's now possible to do an export. So I can export it. I can then go ahead and delete it. And I can then import it back. And we should see it, was it custom demo here, block. So that works as expected. It's not possible to export and re-import block some storage volumes into LXD. That you can look at the size of the particular backup. It should be quite tiny because nothing was written to it at all. So we're just dealing with 5 system headers effectively. But as I mentioned earlier, if you're dealing with busier volumes, like if you actually store something on it, it can get quite a bit larger quite quickly. And like, deleting data doesn't mean that this is gonna shrink. It's just the way it works with block volumes. They just get large. And just cleaning this up. Okay. And that's it. That's all the new features in LXD 4.19. I'm hoping this is going to be quite a nice and successful release. I'm really looking forward to hearing what people are doing with the new metrics feature. For one, I'm really, really looking forward to using it in a number of clusters and production deployments I'm managing. Enjoy the release. It's currently in the candidate channel for Snap users, and it's going to be in stable as usual either Monday or Tuesday, depending on whether we've got any regressions or anything we're dealing with. Thanks for watching. If you've got any questions on the release, the best is probably to head over to the forum and respond to the release post, the one you're seeing on the screen right now. It's going to be linked in the video as well. But as always, you can also just leave a comment on the YouTube video itself. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye.